Sure. My company is Congenica. We're a 5-year-old clinical genomics business based in Cambridge in the UK, and our goal is to unlock the use of genomic data for rare disease patients. We've developed and we make and sell a software platform that we use to analyze complex genomic data like whole genome or whole exome data to be able to find the cause of rare diseases. Yeah, so the standard diagnostic odyssey, as it's called in the UK, US, elsewhere, is a 3 to 5 year diagnostic process for many patients. What we're able to do is, if you can get the whole genomic data from the patient, we can reduce that time the time to diagnosis down to days and weeks rather than months and years. It's a straightforward process, and it's a much less morbid process than the current standard of care. Yeah, so we provide the platform to clinical sites, and we train them and we enable them to use it, and the process is relatively straightforward. The patient has to be referred to the clinical site. They'll have their genome sequenced. The clinician or the clinical scientist will use our platform to identify the 1 or 2 errors or the 1 or 2 variants in the patient's genome that typically causes the disease. Quite often we've found very complex sets of clinical symptoms can be caused by just a simple single change in a patient's genome. And that's a genome of 3 billion bases, and just one change can sometimes cause a complex disease. So 1 in 17 newborns is in some way impacted by a rare disease, and as you say, there's between 7,000 and 8,000 rare diseases. What's common across most of these diseases is they're all caused by a single gene disorder or monogenic diseases. And the way that our platform works is we're indifferent to the actual disease. As long as we have some clinical description of the patient, we can use that to then search through their genome and find the individual error. It's a little bit like taking a sentence of 3 billion letters and then comparing that to a reference and finding out where there's a variation. Yeah, the idea of looking at a patient's genome and determining the cause of the disease is not a new idea. You know, it's been an idea that has been out there for tens and tens of years. What started making it a reality is the fact that you can sequence the genome now for several $100s rather than the thousands and the millions it was even 5 years ago. There are a number of companies that have identified that the next bottleneck is analyzing that complex data. So from a typical rare disease patient, if you have their sequence plus their parents, which is the ideal way, that's about 100 gigabytes of data. So that's typically 10 billion data points. So that's the next bottleneck. We've developed a system that is entirely guided by how the clinician and the clinical geneticist is going to analyze that genome. So we've built a clinical system that guides the user through the analysis and provides a report that can be used in routine clinical care. You know, our competitors tend to have come from the research setting, and they provide incredibly powerful tools for analyzing complex populations. We're one of few who has had the goal right from day one to build something for the clinical customer, clinical user. The reason why we describe ourselves as producing a clinical platform, unlike the research platforms that others produce, is the way our workflow is designed mimics the way that a traditional or a classic clinical geneticist would ask questions about the genome. So it provides information in the right order that can then be summarized in a report, but it's really the uncovering of the information in the right sequence that's important. There are other features, for example, that we show the variation when identified in context of a representation of the chromosome, which typically is how the clinical geneticist would like to see it. So there are a whole series of features that give confidence to the clinical geneticist to be able to make a diagnosis they can stand behind. We've also built in a very large battery of quality features that allow the result to be verified, and there's an audit tab and a verifiable record as to how that decision was established.